Hi everyone, welcome back. We'll move forward. So in the first part, we had, I think, a partial glimpse of the kind of new threat arising. Now in the second part, we'll move on to the challenges that companies are facing to address these new issues. In the afternoon, we'll move, hopefully, to solutions and an outlook. In this second part, about the challenges, we'll first have a panel discussion right now, and after that, we'll have two input talks, specifics about the challenges brought by open source software development. So let's move on to the panel discussion. We'll try to find out a little bit what are the challenges for three stakeholders or three actors in the value chain, coming from the developers, moving on to the supplier of software and the end user, and how each of these stakeholders has to maybe adapt to face the supply chain security issues. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, Alban Hessler. He's a senior manager for advisory and professional services at Elka Security. Thanks, Alban, for joining us. He was previously working for also RUAG, a company in the defense industry, and also NEC, so hardware manufacturers. Then we have Siddhartha Rao. He's vice president for product security at SAP in the middle. He's especially responsible for the secure development processes, standards, and procedures for all the SAP products. So that's a huge task, I guess. And last but not least, on my far left, Mauro Vignati.
Correct.
He's advisor for digital technologies of warfare at the International Committee of the Red Cross. He also worked at the NCSC, the National Center for Cybersecurity, and the Federal Department of Defense. So in a way, we have the value chain. Here, Alban will be representing the developer of software, although he also knows about suppliers. Siddhartha will represent the supplier, the middleman, and Mauro, the customer. All right. Maybe I would like to start first to get a first few statements from each of you from your perspective, starting with Mauro. So from the customer perspective, you're working for a huge NGO or international organization, but I think you also represent, in a way, all customers from big to small.
So first of all, thank you very much for having ICRC here today. So the International Committee of the Red Cross is, as you know, is a neutral, impartial, and independent organization, international organization. So, but we have to deal with the same supply chain, digital supply chain of everyone. The fact is that we use supply chain that stakeholders are providing, and those stakeholders are not really always impartial and neutral as the ICRC. So we're living in a situation where stakeholders in these chains, they can take political stance, they can be part of one party to a conflict, for instance, or sitting states that they are supporting parties to a conflict. This influencing also, attracting also cyber attack on their network. So being a customer, impartial, neutral customer on a supply chain that is possibly under attack because of geopolitical reason, it's a huge risk for the ICRC, clearly. So, and this is the first point. The second one bind to this is that what we see in the last couple of years is that the supply chain attacks, they have in several occasions, malware is being used that are not of high quality. This has impact in different ways. First of all, because those malwares are not under control, fully control of the operators, and from a targeted attack can go out in collateral damages, and this can endanger also end customer like the ICRC, and also because The quality of those malware not being at the top level, other groups can hijack those malwares and using them for other purposes that are not meant for the initial attacker. This is one side of the problem. The second side is that what we see during armed conflict is that wars are pushing the fragmentation of technologies. This means that tech companies that are part of the supply chain, if they take stand for one party or the other to the conflict, they are not able to deliver their software or their solution in territory or region that they cannot serve anymore because they take a stand for the other part. So this is a problem because a global organization like us, we have to operate in different regions, and with the fragmentation of global supply chains, we are coming to regional supply chains. So we cannot have the same technology in all the regions, so we have to have different technologies in different regions, and we have to be able to have a multidisciplinary approach and integrate those technologies. This is creating more cost and disadvantages for us. And the local supply chains are good for economies, local economy, because they are empowering local companies, but has an impact in the way that global supply chain are more reliable for a huge organization like us. So this is for the introduction.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Mauro. We'll come back to your perspective as the customer. Maybe Siddhartha, moving on to supplying software.
Yeah. So folks, you know that SAP is one of the world's most respected names when it comes to enterprise software, right? We have customers in almost every imaginable discipline, including NGOs for sure. And therefore, we are also extremely sensitive and aware that customers expect extremely high qualities and security levels when it comes to what SAP products can deliver. Now, SAP as an enterprise services provider has also been constantly evolving the definition of product security, right? Previously, it was the definition of a product was something which was packaged as a deliverable, as a binary, as an installable, and customers installed it, right? But today, the supply chain has got a lot more complicated or a lot more sophisticated, right? Today, we are a cloud services company, which means that we not only develop software, but we also operate software. And this is something for me, this is a centerfold of the evolution of the definition of product security in delivering not only secure software services to the customer, but also ensuring the security of the software supply chain, that it is now extending from the developer, involving open source ecosystems, as well as going sometimes straight into the network and the developer at the customer's end, plus the end user. So product security today is more than just application security, which is developing secure software. Product security is about the holistic capabilities of developing and operating software securely, right? And this is the message that we are actually evangelizing to each and every developer within the company. So as the global head of product security at SAP, I am responsible for what we call the secure development and operations lifecycle, right? This is a mandatory control within SAP, and every developer within SAP is required to adhere to it. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. Now, when it comes to the topic of securing the supply chain, right? And this is something where a point where I'd like to leave you for the moment. You see that we have put in deep thought into what software supply chain security means, and one of these efforts have been crystallized into this particular open source tool, which I'd welcome each of you to use and navigate, where from an attacker's perspective, it delves into demonstrating what are the various risks a software supply chain can be exposed to. But if you really go into the details of it, it will also tell you at various levels what are the controls that will help you mitigate this risk. So without much ado, I'd like to hand over back to you, Daniel. Yeah.
Thanks, Sid. We'll come back to your perspective, of course, later. And last but not least, Alban, the perspective of the developer.
Yes, so I'm working for Alka and Alka Security. Alka is one of the biggest IT provider in Switzerland. And we develop solutions, but also we perform software development projects for customers in all areas, critical infrastructure, so finance, energy, and so on. And for us, of course, software security is a big topic. It's a crucial topic for our company. So, as we have seen in the keynote, software supply chain security was always a topic since the rise of internet, where we have the first vulnerabilities which were exploited. But now, as software is everywhere in every company, because processes are getting more and more digitalized, it's really a critical issue for our society. And for us, the challenges are more than just having a secure software development lifecycle, having a secure operation of our company, so that we are not attacked and somebody modify our software base. It also goes at challenges such as economics. Often, software security is a shared burden between different stakeholders. And when it's shared, there is always a problem, who pays for it? So for example, we have sometimes the issue, we would like to produce secure software, but the customer doesn't require it, doesn't give the budget for it. So, and here there is something we need to adjust, I think, in the future, so that secure software can be guaranteed for all type of projects. Regulation, there is nothing that imposes us to do secure software, except in some sectors, some verticals, there is a regulation, like from in health, where we have, for example, external audit, which checks that we are doing a good job. But if you look at other sectors, we are free to do whatever we want. And I think that's something we could also improve. Standards, I think that's also one of the biggest issue, is that nowadays, for example, for a customer, it's hard for him to see where are the good providers. How can I see if provider A is performing better in software security as provider B? Or in case of software, is library A better in security as library B? And there is no kind of quick label to check that. And of course, due to this lack of standards, it also has an economical cost, because now I have to perform time to assess how good is this software, and that's a cost for the whole society. So, and of course, the scarcity of cybersecurity competence is an issue, not only for us as developers, but also, as I say, on the customer side. I've seen many times customers not requiring security because simply they didn't have the competence to ask for it. Complexity of dependence. I think also in one of the previous keynote we have seen this comics with a pyramid and with a small piece. I think it's very complex, and also the components are fast moving, so it's always hard to keep track of where is the target moving. And of course, cyber threats for us, for example, as a company. One of our biggest risk is, of course, to be attacked, and somebody gets in and tries to modify the software we provide to our customer, to a critical customer. So that's something we look at, and we keep to the state of the art of security in order to ensure that we protect the software of our customer.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. I think we already touched some of the important questions. One is who is paying for everything, and we'll come back to that later, but also about the competence. And maybe, Mauro, I know maybe it's hard for you because you know about these issues, but many of customers, as Alban said, do not know enough. And in a way, how do we solve this? I mean, do we have to require from every customer that they know more, that they hire the good IT officer who really knows about it? Or do you think the supplier said you have to deal with clients who don't know enough and who don't demand enough, and then you have to kind of educate your clients, and then it's not just selling a software, it's doing consulting so that the client is aware of the security issue. So maybe, where are we going? Like more knowledge at the client side, or more education from the supplier, or Alban also when you were working? Maybe Sid?
Yeah. So I agree with some of the concerns here, right? Security is actually a collaborative activity, and a software vendor, a software supplier alone cannot deliver all guarantees towards securing the processes and also, in some cases, the data of the customer, depending on the scenarios and the products purchased. So what we do and what we also strongly encourage other suppliers to do is to maintain a security narrative at every important customer event. Yeah. So we heard in some previous discussions today also the importance of patching, right? Vendors like SAP regularly deliver security patches. We are committed to it on the second Tuesday of every month. But at the same time, it is freely available, but we see that customers are very often overwhelmed because the customer wants to take care of his business processes. The customer is measuring KPIs where security is not a KPI. And therefore, what happens is that things like the importance of applying patches get skipped. Similarly, when it comes to securing the supply chain, which is really the context of the discussion today, it's beyond just patching. It is also, even if you're using cloud services, customers of cloud services are required to also sometimes securely configure their part of the cloud service. Multi-factor authentication is one example, right? All of you use a popular email service, but how many of you have authorized the email service to also notify you by SMS, for example, so that you use two-factor authentication in signing into the cloud service? Not everybody, and the same is true for enterprise customers. So this is something where we constantly work together with our customers, keep security as a constant narrative at the highest level from the board down, to make sure that within the company, but also outside the company, the awareness is there that this is a collaborative activity.
Okay, maybe to focus on maybe not cybersecurity in general, but on the supply chain issues, maybe from Mauro. Now, a client cannot just say, well, secure their infrastructure. They have to think before they purchase a new project. They have to take, to make due diligence to understand who's they're buying from, and asking for their provider, well, are you really good enough? Can you ensure that everything you're selling me is good enough? And now, how much competence do you have? How much knowledge are you required to have to ask these critical questions to your provider?
Yeah. I remember a couple of weeks ago I had a talk with the person responsible for the security of the cybersecurity of the digital supply chain of ASML. ASML is probably the hottest company worldwide. I mean, only with the machines of ASML, a company can produce chips of 5 and 3 nanometers. So you can understand in geopolitical situation nowadays, the chips are the new gold. So this is the most important company worldwide. And they needed 3,000 suppliers to build a machine. A machine is half of this room, so it's a very huge machine, the lithography machine. And they have to check the security of 3,000 suppliers. I said, you have a tough job because it's very hard to secure this. So we don't have this kind of capability of building a center that is certifying and checking the cybersecurity of the suppliers. But our concern is more than in the security of the supplier, in the availability of the supplier. So we live and we work in context of war, and those are totally unstable situation, and we need a stable supply chain, physical supply chain, but also digital supply chain. So when we have suppliers in our digital supply chain, we have to be sure that those suppliers are able to provide us the tools and the means for our ICT. So what we do at the ICRC is that we are building capability in checking where we have operations in terms of conflicts worldwide, seeing where our suppliers are present in this nation, knowing if those suppliers are able to provide the technology that they should provide to us in those regions where we are operating, and knowing if we have a mismatch in this situation, and knowing if we have to go anticipate this problem and finding new supply chain that can provide us what we need.
Maybe a question for you, Alban. You're developing software with the clients, so together. So do you feel in a way fortunate because you have a kind of privileged relationship with the clients, and you can also nudge them into maybe allocating more budget to security reviews, or do you distinguish your situation from a vendor who just as a client sells the stuff and that's it? Do you think you can have an impact on the awareness of security and convince the client to pay more for better security?
So yes, so we have the chance to have this kind of collaborative work with the customer. We have a full spectrum of customer. And we have customers which will work more in a waterfall fashion. They will say, here's the RFP, please provide this software to us at a fixed price. And then we have very little chance to change things. And we have customers who are more working in an agile way. We trust your competencies. We are going to work together. We are going to do from the specifications to the delivery, the work together. And in between those two cases, one is less collaborative, and that's where we need to do more work in among the project, before the project, I want to say, to educate them, to say, pay attention, you have risk associated with the software you want to build. Please put those requirements in your RFP before you launch it. And for example, it can be sometimes really hard if you are too late and we cannot educate the customer, because then it's too late and then we are blocked with the frame of the contract and the frame of the RFP. So it's part of my job as consulting to help those companies to raise their awareness, to raise their competencies in order that they can put those requirements into RFP, because we as supplier, our software developers, we much prefer to deliver something we know is secure than something we know, okay, it's well built, it doesn't have standard vulnerabilities, but it might not cover all the risk of the customer in his use case.
But okay, but there's one thing which is to tell the customer, well, you need these kind of requirements, whatever, to FA or just the basics. But in a way, you are delivering something, or maybe Sid, you are delivering something which has dependencies from upstream. So can you really tell the client, well, you will have to pay more because we need more time to review our code supplier? Or how can you finance, in a way, who's paying? How can you finance the extra work you will have to do to really triple check the dependency and the fact that the modules, the open source modules you took are really good and you have all the updates? It's a huge work you have to do upstream. So can you just pass the bill to the customer, or do you have to find other ways to finance it? At the end of the day, it's who pays for it? Who pays for the increased security efforts that we have to do?
Right. So now speaking from the perspective of a large software company, right? For us, security is a non-negotiable prerequisite, and there are no absolute guarantees, of course. But what we ask internally of our engineering teams, as also part of the mandatory secure development and operations lifecycle execution, is that you have to make sure that you deliver software of high quality, even if your software component comprises of partially third-party components taken from open source communities or also from a partner network, right? So it means that when it comes to our commitment to security, the customer gets SAP software. And if this SAP software, should this SAP software contain open source software within it, then we expect our engineering line of businesses to deliver the same security assurances to the customer for their software, even if it comprises open source. And this is what also creates trust with the customer, because our customers are honestly also very often putting security, trust, and data protection and privacy before many other concerns.
And how important is it, from all of you, to interact with the other person, in the chain? I mean, from the supplier perspective, do you need, to get feedback from your customers, either for threat or for domain-specific issues? How much, how much is it going also backwards along the chain? And how do you, how do you interact with the open source developers who deliver whatever they deliver? How do you deal with that? So maybe first with the customer, and then we move on to the open source.
That's a very good question, Daniel. So SAP is not just a plain software vendor, which means that we don't just create a website which the customer will use, but we are also a software development platform. So many of our customers are also developing their business processes on enterprise platforms supplied by SAP. So it is all the more important for us to do what you just said, be in constant communication with customer, because we are on one side, delivering software services as a plain software vendor, but on the other side, we are delivering software services that allows the customer to create enterprise software and operate them on our platform. So this collaboration, communication, networking is absolutely essential, and we have established security processes that enable it. And customers get constant communication on it too.
Okay, I'd like to quickly move on to dealing with third-party software and open source. And then after that, I'd be happy to also open the discussion, so you can prepare a few questions. And so I guess we'll hear more about open source right after that, but you're relying from the supply side, also developer side, more and more about on open source software. How do you deal with this? The fact that, well, it has its own community, own rules. Do you just take it and then make your review? Do you contribute it? How can you make sure that the thousands of components you're taking are good? How do you vet? How do you choose which library to use? Is it heuristic? Just go with the most popular one, or do you go with you talk with colleagues and you start to know whose source is solid? Maybe Alban first.
Yeah, so we rely a lot on open source code, of course, to build solutions fast and which are robust for customer. One big advantage of open source is, of course, we can always look under the hood and look what is the software underneath, and we can assess it ourselves if we want to, which is often not the case with proprietary software. So that's a great advantage for us. It's also a great advantage of a customer, because not only us can check it, but also the customers at the very end. And so when we have important projects which rely on major open source bricks, generally we are going to contribute to those bricks, because we will need to adapt it to meet our customers' need. We might find some bugs, some vulnerabilities, and generally, if we do that, we are going to contribute to the open source community back, because yes, we profit from it, so we should give it back by making our own contribution. And of course, one of the big difficulty with those open source libraries is that there are many. It's not only, you take the different languages, you take Linux packages, you take JavaScript, you take Python, so you have, I think it was somebody say a word, 300 packages per project. And of course, to check all those packages is very tedious. So of course, we rely on automatic tools which check what are the published CVEs, but that's a bit reactive. We have to wait for our published CVEs to see it. So here, there is sometimes better ways to choose. Popularity is one, of course. If it has been used by many, it's of course a better guarantee that more people have looked at it. And others are programs like from Google who are really checking in depth those libraries, and so we can rely on this extra assurance provided by third party. But we can think about it as we can see as software supply chain as a critical infrastructure for our society. So I think we can think of some national or supranational agency would, for the good of mankind, look at those libraries and say, provide checks, provide assurance, which can be used by everybody. So I think that's kind of ideas that should be investigated in the future, because our world is going to be digital.
So you mean that there would be an independent body financed by the government, or we could also say by a foundation, which would be so independently responsible for checking the security, the safety, the quality of open source libraries?
Yeah, so far there have been foundations which are sponsored by private companies, for sure, but we can also find of other governance which are a bit away from only private companies, of course.
Okay, we'll hear about the foundation in the next talk. You meant, Alban, okay, we want to contribute to the open source software. It's normal, it's giving and taking and giving. I mean, do you think you have enough resources, so financial resources? So when one of your coders says, look, I want to go further, I want to contribute more, does his line manager come and say, look, this is not crucial for our clients, so stop it? Or do you manage to finance also this kind of pro bono activities for the common good?
The honest answer, we have always a specific budget for that, and we cannot give thousands of developers to just do contributions to open source and not work on our customers' projects. So of course, there is always a limit to do it. We always try to align our business with what we can push to the open source community. But for us, it's also part of the motivation of our developers. If we can sometimes give them the chance to contribute to a bigger project than just a business project we are working on, that really motivates them. So it's always a case-by-case answer, of course.
Okay, thanks a lot. We'll talk more about open source after the panel. I'd be very happy to take questions for our panelists. I have questions here on the right and then on the left and then in the middle. Okay, right, left, middle.
Juan Avalon, thank you for the very interesting discussion. Given the recent announcement of the cybersecurity strategy in the US by the US government, one of the points is shifting liability for insecure software and software products and services. I understand from what all of you have said and the experience we all have here that the incentives are sort of broken, you know, it doesn't fit well. What are your views? I mean, is it a government decision? You were mentioning earlier it would be nice to have maybe for the good of humankind that somebody steps in and puts some efforts into this sort of thing. Is it necessary for governments to step in and say, this needs to be this way, therefore you have a way of justifying investing in that amount, increasing prices? I don't know. It's an open question. I'd love to get your views on this topic.
I can give my view. I mean, the view of.
Okay, let's get the three perspectives. I think they might be diverging.
Thank you for the question. So, because there is no such as, there is no situation where the government is intervening at the moment at the level. So, the cost is on our side, on the customer side. So, I take the example of ICRC. We are having costs because of that. We open a delegation for cyberspace that is doing R&D, research and development, to find out solutions that are not depending from vendors that are unique to us, and then we can control 100% in the entire supply chain. So those are costs generated by this technology fermentation and everything that comes in, because there is no such intervention from the state. So at the moment, the customer is paying for this situation. It would be interesting to see if there is an evolution worldwide, so from China, but also from the EU, from the US, in seeing much more intervention from the state in this regard. Yes.
Maybe say it about the states regulating more, asking for standards,
right.
Audits. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, of course, as an enterprise software provider across countries, we are sensitive to and also immediately affected by such changes in regulations, right? We generally are of the opinion that It would be good for the software industry and also deliver clarity when it comes to security practices if various lawmaking authorities agreed on a set of internationally accepted standards. So let's take ISO 27001, for example, which actually governs the security qualities of information security management systems. So what we enforce, what we deliver by enforcing secure development and operations practices across every LOB as a mandatory practice is actually ISO 27001 compliance. The devil is in the details, and we have standards that are mapped out to almost every relevant security expectation out there, right? So it covers secure development, secure operations, and so on. So I actually, in interest of the software industry and interest of also of innovation, right? Software industry and innovation is also very often triggered by smaller players, which also need to be able to have a level playing field and a competitive playing field. I would actually support standardization. And when it comes to sharing of responsibilities, also you spoke of open source software. I mean, SAP's model is a very clear give and take model. And this morning I checked up the open source contributor index for commercial vendors, and SAP is within the top 10, and we are ahead of our competitors. We are actually number 8 as of this morning. So we are not only prolific consumers of open source, but we contribute to open source initiatives. And you saw the supply chain risk navigator, which I showed before, which was open source. But also we have Kubernetes-based orchestration called Gardener, which is open source. Or in context of an upcoming talk, we have developed a flavor of Linux, which is extremely slim, based on Debian, called Garden OS, which is also open source and beyond. So we really see this as a collaborative model including the open source communities, but also including our customers when it comes to securing the supply chain, because the supply chain does not end within SAP and also doesn't necessarily always start within SAP.
A very quick follow-up maybe for you, Alban. Sid mentioned ISO. Is it enough to say, look, we follow this? Do you think ISO should update its requirements to include more of the new issues we've heard about the supply chain or malware as a service or whatever? Do you think it's moving quick enough and it's stringent enough? Would you say it's ISO, so it's good to your customer, or would you say, no, it's not good enough, we have to make more?
So ISO is good. It's a good base. ECA is also ISO certified, and it provides some guarantees about software security, about how we protect ourselves. But it's not enough. I think it's not granular enough, and I think it's one indicator, but more can be done to provide transparency about the good practices in secure software development. I want to say about regulation. Of course, we have to find the right balance. Generally, we didn't put too much regulation on software until now because we were afraid that it will harm innovation. But I think when it comes to critical infrastructure, we must make sure at least the software that we have in critical infrastructure, which our society depends, as the level of security we expect from a modern society. And talking about regulation, I think, for example, we provide a lot of software to critical infrastructure. We would also appreciate to get some help sometimes from the government. So, for example, getting more information about threats, for example, from the NCSC, which, for example, we are not getting today because we, as a software company, are not considered as critical infrastructure yet.
Okay, maybe this might change, and I understand that probably the government requiring a very high level of security also for the supply chain for critical infrastructure makes sense. Nobody will object that, and maybe it could push the whole industry into raising the standard. A question there.
Thank you so much for the enlightening discussion. My question may be directed more to the development side. So when you're trying to develop or use the open source tools that are going to provide the underlying security guarantees, how attractive is it, and how common is it to have the formal verification of these packages or modules? And if it is not so common, then how far is it from being common, given that it may also lack in features compared to the non-verified counterpart? Thank you.
So our command is to formally check all the dependencies in a project. I would say we perform these kind of things only for very specific projects, which are high security projects. Otherwise, we rely on more automatized tools, checking about non-CVEs, checking about dependencies and composition of software. But really, the time and budget you need to have to do this formal verification is something that only very special customers can afford.
There was a question in the middle, maybe before. I think no. Okay, sorry. Yes.
Hi. There was an interesting discussion about the ISO. I was just wondering, how do you foresee the upcoming regulation in Europe with the Cyber Resilience Act or the update to the NIS affecting, the various sectors from the three perspectives on the security of products in particular?
So maybe let's go in this direction.
I'm going to pass on this question because I'm not up to date with all the bits and of this new regulation. So,
okay, and Switzerland is not part of Europe, so
thank you.
Everything is fine. Sid.
Yeah, so we are definitely part of Europe, and we are also definitely pursuing developments regarding the Cyber Resiliency Act, or also developments in the United States, because when we have to deliver our services and products, they have to comply with local regulations, right? Now, this is my personal opinion, and I think this is also in the line of what I mentioned some time back, that what we are seeing as the software industry is a lot of individual regulations, and fact is that very often these regulations are created by the time the regulations become law, being discussed really become law, they sometimes also are already outdated at the outset. Yeah, and this is one of the risks that may be incurred as a result of it, and sometimes it's really the small companies that get totally affected because the regulations come with overheads, and of course there is no doubt that security should be a non-compromisable product attribute. There's no doubt about it. But when lawmakers get into creating regulations that become mandatory, very often it is the software companies and customers, or companies and customers getting nervous about what it actually means. And right now we could be around that stage.
Maybe Mauro from the...
I have the same answer as Alban, so I have less information on this regard, and it's not strictly speaking my line of work, so
Okay.
I pass it.
Thank you.
We had more questions maybe here in the middle.
Sure. Hello.
Oh.
So I'm going to ask a question which is, it was someone else?
Please.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you. So it might sound a bit hippie, but I'm a PhD student, so please indulge me for a moment. So there's part of the community which uses a lot of open source software, which seems to be a bit more resilient to supply chain attacks. I'm talking about like Linux or GNU. And the key part is not only that it's open source, but part of it is also the licensing, which allows someone to modify the source code by their suppliers. Now think of it in a corporate situation. Even if you could identify the source of a problem in your supply chain, you might not have the legal right to modify the source code to fix that. So my question is, how do you think we can push the rest of an industry towards a more permissive software like licensing policy, which can allow us to fix problems when we do find them?
Maybe for you, Sid. I mean, do you allow tampering with your code?
Yeah. I mean, just to clarify, this question is specific to open source components not allowing tampering of open source code, correct?
Not just open source, like if you have any supplier, even in an entirely closed source ecosystem,
Right.
you can have suppliers where you know they have malicious issues, but you're not allowed to fix them.
Okay, good. So I'll repeat the question just so that it's also recorded, right? I think, and please let me know if my summarization is correct. It is about basically a a software vendor integrates software from a supplier, right? This could be open source, but doesn't necessarily need to be. And it's a case where we are not allowed to change the code. We are contractually not allowed to change code with in interest of delivering security, right? Now, I would say that luckily, this is not very frequent. Yeah. So when we speaking about generally about how large corporations manage these risks, when we choose a supplier, and that supplier may be delivering code, but very often could also be delivering a component that is not immediately visible from the outside. The contract with the supplier has security relevant clauses. Furthermore, there are responsible disclosure practices in place, which means that when I get to know of a vulnerability in your software, I'm required to tell you that, hey, I found this vulnerability in your software, please fix it, right? So if you put these two together, you would see that, at least from a legal point of view, which is how your question came up, we would normally avoid the situation at the outset that we have a vulnerable supplier who refuses to fix the problem and insists that we also cannot bypass it. That's one part. The other part is there are cases where a supplier may disappear. The company doesn't exist anymore. And in these cases, we have sandboxing technologies and we have other mitigations, and of course, we have the kill switch. So there are many ways of, at a corporate level, mitigating or managing these risks, which you mentioned. Good question.
Yeah, Christoph Plutter, Ericsson. So this about towards fragmented supply chains and regional supply chain. So maybe towards Mauro, could you share what is your experience at the Red Cross in handling those fragmented supply chains? That means, what's the experience of where can this handling be optimized and rationalized across multiple fragmented supply chains?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So it's very complicated, it's very costly in this sense. So if we take the example now, operating in Ukraine, for instance, we have less visibility and capability in communicating there. We had also to find new ways of communication. We use now, we are testing also low orbit satellite company that you probably know the name, but I don't want to name it here. And but this is also new to us. We have to buy the terminals, test the terminals, paying, and so integrating even more technology depending which is the region where we are operating. So we are not the only global company. So I can imagine other companies that are the same situation are investing a lot of money in this. The difference is that we live with the with the donors that give us the resources to do this. Other companies are probably commercial companies that have more means to do this kind of work. We have to invest every cent, every franc, that every dollar that we invest has to be invested in a very precise manner. So being forced by the fragmentation to buy new technology, testing new technology, it's kind of a big problem for us. So we try to minimize this and try to find out a supplier that cover the most possible regions worldwide, but we are confronted with situation where we have to have a specific supplier for a specific region, and this generate more cost. So we are not at the end of the tunnel in this way. Yeah.
Okay, we have time for a final question. If no, it's good. Okay, then we'll make the most of it and finish on time. I'd like to thanks again at all our panelists. It was a very interesting discussion. Alban from LK, Sid from SAP, and Mauro from the International
Thank you very much.
Red Cross.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite.